Joe Fredericks here. This is a quick update before we get into the podcast. This is being recorded on Thursday, December 4th. There are charges coming likely as a result of the fire from Lutsen Resort in February 2024. The podcast you're about to hear is our original reporting. We will update in future episodes following any information from the State Fire Marshal or the Cook County Attorney's Office. Let's jump into the episode. Tyler Cobb started his final shift at Lutsen Resort at 11 p.m.
I usually got there a little bit before just because me and the person that would work the shift before were friends. And I remember us talking for a while most nights. And I remember sitting at the desk and basically just wondering, what should I do first?
About an hour after his shift started, the first smoke started to come up through the floorboards near the front desk. Tyler called 911, stepped outside the building, and watched the flames take over. Within 90 minutes, the building was utterly destroyed by the fire, though the charred remains would smolder for days near the shoreline of Lake Superior. When first responders arrived, they wanted to know how Tyler was doing and if he needed medical attention. Tyler told them he believed he was fine, but that he was worried about the building. He was also worried about what was inside.
Even though it's a horrifying night, one of my favorite things is whenever I'm in there, they're like, hey, are you okay? Is anything wrong? And then I was like, yeah, I think I'm okay. I'm just sad that I didn't get to finish my book. And they're like, that's not what we mean. I had 2 or 3 chapters left in my book, and I was hoping that I could finish it that night. But to them, that's not what they meant. They're like, okay.
What book?
I was reading Pines by Blake Crouch at the time, but I still haven't finished the trilogy yet. I don't know if it's because I associate it with that.
What Tyler didn't know when he made the 911 call to report the fire at Lutsen Resort in February 2024 is that before the fire started, someone else was in the building with him. My name is Joe Fredericks. This is The Fire, a North Shore story. Lutsen Resort owner Bryce Campbell called former general manager Edward Venegas about a month after the fire. Bryce said he had something he needed to tell Edward. It had to do with Bryce's whereabouts the night of the fire.
He said, I was there, and I said, you were where? I went back to my office. You went back to your office? I thought you left at 8:30 or 8:45. I did. But you went back? Yes. When was that? About 11:30. You were there after 11:30? I said, but night audit, Tyler would have seen you. No, I went in the back door. And I took a breath, and I said, you went in the back door after 11:30 to get something that you had left before, and no one saw you. Yes. And I said, I'm sorry, and I hung up on him. That was the end of that.
Later that night, Edward says that Bryce texted him and apologized for allowing his personal behavior to impact the business. A few weeks after the phone call, Bryce and Edward talked about Bryce's whereabouts the night of the fire. Here's how Edward says it went down.
When did you leave the office? 8:30, okay. And so then where did you go? Well, I ordered a pizza. From where? Domino's. And so you went to pick that up before you got to your condo at Superior Shores property? Yes. And so what time did you leave the pizza place? What time did you go in the door? And I know my nature sometimes can be interrogatory, but now I really am interrogating you. I then was able to, on my own, get reports from a scan, a key card that he used to get into his condo every day, that it would tell me what time he opened that door.
Does it check out?
I mean, close, within a few minutes, yes, it could check out.
Edward has spent a lot of time listening to and thinking about this aspect of the story. Where was Bryce the night of the fire, and what was he doing? So he gets his pizza.
Yeah, so he gets his pizza and goes home.
9:30, and
9:30, almost maybe 10 o'clock or so, and then he tells me that he had, he's beginning to kind of browse online onto a particular, dating app, if that's what you call it, and he says he had 1 or 2 pizza slices. And I said, and then what happens? He said, well, I connect with someone.
Next, Bryce told Edward that he left his house at around 10:30 with the intent to drive back to Lutsen Lodge to pick something up.
And so what time did you leave then? A little after 10:30. That means you arrived a little after 11:30. It's an hour and 5 minutes. It's 65 minutes at the speed he drives, because he's got a lot of speeding tickets to show that. And so, at the speed you drive at night, it's an hour and 5 minutes, hour and 8 minutes, if that's what that is. And I said, so, pinning you down, it's 11:30, 11:35-ish? Yeah, maybe. Okay. And so 8 minutes? He says, yeah. Okay, 8 minutes.
Edward says Bryce told him he was only stopping briefly at the lodge to pick something up, and that's what took about 8 minutes.
I now know differently from investigators. They've shared with me that it's about 30 minutes on property versus 8, so move the 8. The 8 number has moved off quite a bit. Now it's like 3 times that number. And I said, then what happened? He says, well, I left. I got what I needed to, and I left. And then where did you go after that? Because my phone records show that I was not able to reach you for a very long time. From what I think is 12:30 to almost 3:30, I was not able to reach you in any way. I called your number and got voicemail every single time, and no text message replies from you, furiously saying, we have a fire, we have a fire. And I said, so where did you go? Well, I went to where I was headed to. And where was that? Someone I met in Cook County. Like where? He says, well, on County Road 14. And I took a breath, because Bryce doesn't know where I live. And I don't live on County Road 14. I have an address that's off of 14. So even if you looked up in the personnel record, it wouldn't say 14. And so I said, where on County Road 14? And he gave me an address. And I know where that is. I don't know the person, but I know what the address is, because I see it on the sign when you drive by. And I said, okay. And so how long were you there? A little after 3. Okay. And that was the end of that. That was the end of that.
Edward says he was trying to contact Bryce multiple times during the night.
Now, he did share with me, he says, I did get your text messages. I saw your missed calls. It appeared that he was out of cell phone signal for that period of time, or his phone was off, and I never saw him. He never communicated to me that he was there. I never saw him.
I drove to Canada to talk with Bryce about the night of the fire. Though he never acknowledged to me specifically about why he went in the building less than an hour before the fire started, he did not deny such an event occurred. Security footage from a business in Lutsen, recorded around the same time the fire was reported to the authorities by Tyler Cobb, the night watchman at Lutsen who called 911 after he saw smoke in the lobby, puts Bryce near Lutsen Resort not long before the fire starts. From there, Edward says that Bryce told him he went through Grand Marais and continued up Highway 61 toward the Canadian border. Bryce spent about 3 hours at an undisclosed location, a private residence, about 15 miles from Grand Marais. He then returned to the lodge around 3 a.m., the building now mostly destroyed but still burning.
I don't think I've ever drove that fast in my life, and I'm a fast driver, but got there pretty quick, and that's kind of, I guess, what was just shocking is didn't expect to pull into what I pulled into. I was expecting, not expecting good, but not expecting there to be nothing left.
Bryce never admitted to me that he was at the resort before the fire, though he's told multiple people that, including the people investigating the fire. I've published multiple news articles about him being in the lodge before the fire as well, including before Bryce agreed to sit down with me and record audio for the podcast. Bryce being inside Lutsen Lodge within an hour before the fire starts raised the eyebrows of pretty much everyone who heard about it. It turns out, according to the resort's former facilities manager, Quentin McCorquodale, Bryce was also in the building a couple nights before the fire as well.
Initially, my thoughts on it, when I first heard that he'd been walking around midnight, was, he's running a failing business. I can understand completely wanting to, for whatever reason, maybe to ground yourself in the place that you've owned, emotional investment, maybe burning the midnight oil. There's like a good number of reasons that you might be able to, or might be around, at midnight.
A former Lutsen Resort employee named Chris told Quentin the day before the fire that Bryce was in the resort around midnight on Saturday night. It was a time he'd never been seen in the building. It was 2 nights later that the fire destroyed the lodge.
I think it's incredibly insuspicious, generally speaking. But this is my own tinfoil hat conspiracy theory hour stuff here. I think that he was doing a dry run, if that makes sense. As in, like, trying to figure out where he would be observed, how long it would take him to get to a specific area, stuff like that. I think that that makes more sense, or maybe he was building himself up to it, trying to figure out what specific night would work best.
For his part, Quentin has little in the way of sympathy for Bryce when it comes to the public speculation about the origins of the fire. In fact, from his perspective, Quentin, who was hired at Lutsen Resort in October 2022, believes that Bryce tried to pin him for arson in connection with the fire.
I felt like a narrative was starting to be put together, and I couldn't quite prove it, but I definitely felt I needed to tread carefully.
The resort owed money to vendors, contractors, state agencies, and others, according to Quentin. Quentin himself had become privy to information via emails exchanged between Edward and the Lutsen Resort accounting director, a woman named Donna Wolke. That information included the fact the company could miss the next payroll, which, as you may recall from the last episode, Quentin confronted Bryce about in the hallway at Lutsen Lodge about 8 hours before the fire started. Following the exchange, which occurred Monday afternoon, Quentin says he packed up some of his personal possessions and considered the possibility that he'd just worked his last shift at the resort. It was largely okay, he reasoned, as he'd already been looking for work and had landed another job at a nearby lodge. Leaving his office for what could potentially have been the last time, Quentin took a few personal possessions with him, including a notebook, a screwdriver, and a full-face respirator mask. He purchased the slightly scaled back from Darth Vader-looking mask in 2020 when he was painting and sanding floors at a hotel that he worked at in California. Quentin has the Amazon receipt to prove it. After cleaning out his desk, Quentin headed for the main exit.
I scooped those up, took them out to my car. I passed Bryce in the hallway. He looked at me, kind of raised eyebrow, and then he just passed me by, and that was it. Came back, stood at the front desk for a while until Alan came in. I let Alan know that there's a good chance that we were not being paid for this pay period, like this day that we were in. He began freaking out, reasonably so. And that was it. I got in my car, went home.
Not long after that exchange, Bryce sent a text message to Edward, indicating that if something strange should happen to the resort, the people needed to know about the gas mask that Quentin was carrying.
He had texted me and said that he had this uncomfortable argumentative behavior from Quentin about payroll, that kind of stuff. And then shortly after that, maybe an hour or so, I got a text message from Bryce that had a screenshot of a message that he had sent to Stephen Day, his husband, saying, if something happens to me, paraphrasing, I just saw Quentin with a gas mask in his hand.
After the fire, it was Edward who told fire investigators, operating off of the tip from Bryce, about Quentin and the gas mask.
I didn't connect it to anything at that moment when I saw the text message. I was concerned about it on Tuesday enough to call it out and say, I have this text message from Bryce. Here it is, and have you guys talked to Quentin about where he was yesterday or last night? And they did. I don't know if I was being given that text message on purpose or not. I think at some point I came to wonder if that text message to me was on purpose.
Quentin says that he was interviewed by investigators on numerous occasions about the night of the fire. However, he says he had an alibi, and it happened because of a Tinder date. You're at home. You're scrolling on Tinder?
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. Not so much scrolling on Tinder. I'd already matched with this young lady. So, we had a date. So, I went and picked her up from
First time you were meeting her?
No, I'd known her prior. She was a local. It's one of those things where you meet someone and then you see him on Tinder. So, I'd met this person in person before, like a mutual, and they show up, and I'm like, okay, if I swipe right, if they swipe right, then I kind of know the dynamic here. Yeah. So, we went to my sister's place. And then afterwards, went back. We watched Raising Arizona, a phenomenal film if you haven't seen it. And then just hung out for a while. 12:26, get the phone call from Tyler. Tyler says there's smoke coming out from the vents, the floor, he said specifically. And so I get my things together, get dressed, drive down. The sheriff was on site at that point, and Tyler was up front. And I tried looking in the windows. The windows were completely smoked up. And then, I kind of stood out there with Tyler. The sheriff called the fire department shortly after. And then they showed up. We watched it burn for a while. And that was about it for the evening. Like 3 a.m, I decided I should probably sleep at this point in time.
A couple days later, an investigator from Bryce's insurance company for Lutsen Resort, a woman named Sherry who worked for Auto Owners Insurance Company, wanted to talk with Quentin about the gas mask that Bryce says he saw him with.
I definitely felt I needed to tread carefully. So, I met with Sherry at Cascade Lodge, sat down, and then she asked about the mask. She asked about my whereabouts that night, who my point of contact was, if anyone would have seen me, an exact kind of breakdown of where I went in town. And then basically she told me that she thinks that Bryce is attempting to make it look like I had committed arson, and that he had told her that I was behaving erratically and aggressively, and that he was very concerned, was the term for it. Part of me thought maybe this is an interrogation tactic of just trying to get me off guard.
To be your buddy like a cop does sometimes.
Yes, exactly. But that wouldn't hurt either, because then I could just provide my actual alibi. Immediately after talking to her, I didn't sleep terribly great for obvious reasons. I went to the Mountain Inn. I asked where their cameras were located specifically. And then he gave me a breakdown, the gentleman at the front desk. He said he couldn't get that footage for me because he didn't have access for it. So I ended up telling Sherry. Sherry said they weren't giving her that information, that she would have to have the police subpoena it. And that was kind of where that went. I think that's my last interaction with Sherry. And at the time, I assumed that Edward and Bryce were complicit in attempting to pin me for arson.
How does it feel to come to a place because you want to go hiking and be involved in a business, and then to have that scenario where you could have ended up in prison if you didn't have a good alibi?
Succinctly, not great. I don't know. Like, part of me wants to say the whole, I feel betrayed, but like, betrayed indicates a degree of trust. I know he was capable of certain things. I didn't anticipate the degree, so to speak. So I always assumed that maybe I would be let go on like a moment's notice for some trumped up charges, right? Maybe that'd be like the worst of it. And you come to expect that, but like, no, I was pretty low.
You had some psychological impact from it?
Yeah. I my whole family, they were like just telling me to come back to Kentucky, and I'm like, something's off. Like, I can't go. It's bad if I just pick up and leave right now. I don't know how to explain it, but something's off. And like, it's just, there's a paranoia that comes with it, because you're like, they were concerned that Bryce was gonna, like, you know, because all they know is this guy's got a bunch of money, and they know nothing about him, you know. But like, yeah, they were concerned for my general safety, and I was too. But yeah, I would say it had a decently profound psychological impact.
Bryce says his only objective in telling people about Quentin and the gas mask was to share information that could be relevant.
If I am going to be honest, It did not sit well with me how fast the building burnt down that day. It was fast. And that just wasn't sitting right. And you start to recall things that happened. Just the fact that there was an issue that day, a bit of a standoff, and that the last time I saw him, he had a gas mask. It just was strange. Not trying to pin it on him, but it just seemed like it was mention worthy.
Bryce insists that he no longer thinks Quentin did it.
I think if there's anything that would have been found, it would have been found now. I don't think Quentin did it. I don't think that has anything to do with that day. It just, at the time, it was strange.
Within a matter of days, Quentin says that questions stopped coming in from investigators about his specific whereabouts and anything else related to the mask. The questions from investigators, he says, started to focus on Bryce and some water heaters in the building. And where did you think that the fire was originating from?
Oh, I thought it was originally the pool. That was my thing. I thought there was some sort of electrical thing because there was smoke coming from the area, and I think maybe it traveled, the smoke did, and came out that window. But initially, I actually thought it was from the pool area where we had that blower.
But now where did you, if somebody asked you today?
Oh, it's probably the hot water heater. I mean, that's where all the questions have been centered on, and I have pictures of it. That's where it ignited, is directly over that. So
over the water heater?
Yeah.
And who's asking questions about the water heater?
Police, insurance investigators, different insurance investigators, which usually indicates they're following something, So,
what kind of questions do they ask you about it?
They want to know what work had been done on it, what the companies that had worked on it was, if both of those heaters were operational. I tell them no, one of them had been unoperational almost the entire time I'd been there.
Edward says that he too has been asked about the water heaters and a possible accelerant multiple times by the investigators. Furthermore, Edward says that Bryce spoke to him about being in the basement and putting his hands on the water heaters.
He was questioning himself out loud, saying, did I have something to do with this? I turned a propane gas valve on to the on position on one of the hot water heaters down in the basement. And I said, you did? I perked up on it and said, why were you in the basement? I've never seen you there before, right? You're not mechanically inclined, so what were you down there for? There's nothing down there. It's damp and wet and dusty, so I don't know what you're down there in the basement for. But what did you do? He said, well, I came in from that side entrance. And he says, I saw one of the gas valves turned in the off position. And so what did you do? He says, I turned it to the on.
The fact Bryce was in the basement, let alone tinkering with infrastructure, is in and of itself unusual, Edward says.
The height of the basement ceiling is not a comfortable place for Bryce to be because of his physical height. So you have to kind of crouch down. You have to kind of get smaller in that space because of that basement and how you get into the basement from a small, stairwell, that kind of stuff. So what are you down there for to begin with?
The questions about the water heaters started coming in to former employees of the resort, including Edward and Quentin, not long after the fire. More recently, including in April 2025, investigators asked about a can of flammable liquid. Edward and Quentin said investigators wanted to know if there would be any reason for a can of Rust-Oleum wet-look lacquer to be inside the resort. Edward told investigators that a similar product was used to put a gloss on the rocks of the fireplace at least once a year. Even though a product like this may have been present at Lutsen Resort, Quentin, the former facilities manager, says it wouldn't have been kept in the basement, or even in the main lodge for that matter.
I talked about refinishing the floors, and they asked if there's polyurethane stored down there, and I said, nope, the polyurethane was located up in maintenance in a can, so...
Did they ever ask you about Bryce and the water heaters?
Yeah. One of them had inquired if there was any reason that Bryce would have tampered with the water heater, like from a maintenance perspective, of opening up one of the gas lines. And I said no, they shouldn't be.
At this time, it remains unknown if Bryce Campbell will be charged with arson, fraud, or anything having to do with the fire whatsoever. The court of public opinion has not been kind to him in the past 2 years. The million-dollar question that many people, from community members to friends to media, want to ask is, did you start the fire?
Pretty straightforward question, but I can also answer no, of course not. But yeah, just...
A years-long investigation, insurance money, possible litigation, and the impact the fire has had on the North Shore community, including individuals involved in the production of this podcast. Next time on The Fire. This podcast was written and produced by me, Joe Fredericks. Story editing by Julie Sensulo. Support for the podcast comes from Kickstarter contributions, courtesy of people like David McDonald, Don McKeever, Chris D. J. White, Connie with a K, Annie Passis, Mike Larson, Amy Terrell, Buck Benson, Jim McDonald, and dozens of others. This podcast is also supported by Clover Valley Electric, a family-owned electrical contractor serving Minnesota's North Shore from Duluth to Grand Marais and everywhere in between. Their team handles everything from service and troubleshooting calls to full new builds, underground power and fiber installations, as well as commercial work, including lighting replacements. So whether it's a lakeside cabin or a small business or a large resort property, they bring craftsmanship, safety, and integrity to every job. Clover Valley Electric, built for the North, powered by experience.